The Shroud of Turin. A shroud is a burial cloth, and Turin is a city in Italy. So the Shroud of Turin refers to a specific burial cloth in the city of Turin, Italy. Here's an image of the Shroud of Turin. It is made of linen and it is about 14 and a half feet long and 3.5 feet wide. It bears a faint image of a crucified, wounded man, the front and back side of this man. You can also see scorch or burn marks on this piece of linen. Here's the front image of the man. He is looking directly at us, although his eyes are closed, and one hand is over the other, and you can see the burn marks around his shoulder areas. Here's the back side, and it's apparent that there are wounds all over his back, starting from his head all the way down his back, buttocks, and all the way down his legs. And then his feet aren't quite standing firmly on the ground in a standing position. You can see the bottom of the foot on the left side you can see the bottom of that foot. So it's not standing, it's elevated. Now, this painting from 1620, called The Deposition of Christ, shows how the shroud would have been used. The shroud would have been laid out on the ground. The body would have been placed on one end of the shroud. Since it's 14 feet long, a 6 foot human can go on one end, and then the other side of the shroud would be folded over the top of that human. And then they would tie it, and uh, that would be used to secure the body, and then they would bury the body. In this picture, we see three men as part of that burial process. We have Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Both of those men are mentioned in the Gospels as burying Jesus's body. And then the artist also places John, the author of the Gospel of John. He places him in this painting. Behind those men, there are three women who are crying. Those are the three Marys. And at the top of the image, we have three angels holding the Shroud of Turin. And you can see the front and back images of the man on the shroud that they are holding. And so this means that the Shroud of Turin would have been known 400 years ago when the artist made this painting. Now, with the invention of photography, people started taking photographs of everything, and that included photographs of the Shroud of Turin. The first man to take a successful photograph of the Shroud of Turin was Sakundo Pia on May 28, 1898. The photograph revealed that the image on the shroud is a negative image, and the positive image is much more detailed. Sakundo Pia said, "Closed in the dark room, all intent upon my work, I felt a strong emotion when, during the development, I first saw appearing the holy face on the plate, with so much emphasis that I was surprised and together cheerful, since I could from that moment be sure about the good result of my enterprise." So Pia was the first person to see the positive image on the Shroud of Turin, because the Shroud of Turin is revealing to us a negative image. And that positive image just popped out at him. And it says he felt a strong emotion and was surprised and cheerful. So this is both a positive image and a negative image, just to explain that the lights and darks are reversed on a negative image from what we normally expect to see. And this was the start of photography. Through film, we see the negative image, and then that has to be developed, and then we have the positive image. So this means that on the shroud, the lights and darks are reversed. And when we take a picture, a photograph of that shroud, then we can finally see the positive image. So no one could have seen the positive image until the invention of photography. Here is the negative image beside the positive image of the man on the shroud. And you can see that that negative image, it's much easier to see. In fact, the negative image You have to be at least 8 feet away from the shroud to even see the image at all. If you get too close, it disappears. It's very, very faint. And so that negative image helps us to see the image of the man on the shroud in a lot more detail. And here's the backside of the negative image and the positive image. Now, Secundo Pia, he had a lot of bad press from his photograph. People thought that he created a hoax, that he manipulated the image in some way, and that image wasn't authentic, wasn't genuine to what's in the shroud, but that Secundo Pia did something to the image. And he was only an amateur photography, so he received a lot of grief for his photograph. However, in 1931, Giuseppe Henri took photographs of the shroud and received similar results to Pia's. So we are 3 decades later now, and you can see Henri's photo beside Pia's photo. And so this vindicated Pia. He was not making it up. He did not create the image. It's really there when you take a photograph of the shroud. Now, since then, people have continued using the latest technology to try to find the image in the shroud. And this is from shroud3d.com. If you go to that website, you can actually see this animation, this short animation of this three-dimensional image um, moving for about 40 seconds or so. So we're continuing to try to use the latest technology to find what does that man look like in the shroud. And then through the use of artificial intelligence, if you ask AI to come up with the image of the man in the shroud, this has been shared on social media recently that AI thinks this is what that man probably looked like. Now, people have also tried to create three-dimensional mannequins or statues of the man in the shroud. And so here's one of them, and you can see that his body is just covered in blood. This is what is on the shroud. Over 300 wounds on this body. And one of these wounds you would feel pain from for weeks. So this man suffered terribly. Now, let me talk a little bit more about that photonegativity quality. This is known as the first photograph. It's called View from the Window at Le Gras in 1826 or 1827. They're not quite sure exactly when this was taken. But this is when photonegativity would have first been seen, would have first been understood. And so again, we have the positive image. The lights and darks are where we expect them. The negative image reverses the lights and darks. So the question is, why would anyone create a negative image centuries before the invention of photography? We'll talk more about how early we believe the shroud can be found in documented records, but I've already showed you that painting from 1620. So photography started 1826, 1827. So why would anyone reverse the lights and darks on this image if they were forging it or painting it? What would be the point? Why would you make an image that is hard for the human eye to see? Let's talk about scientific studies now. In 1976, two scientists were intrigued when one of Henri's photos of the shroud was placed in a VP8 analyzer. This device uses a brightness map to detect elevations. The image on the shroud displayed 3D characteristics, and you can see how that image, the face of the man on the shroud, is popping out in 3 dimensions. So this suggests to some people that the shroud must have wrapped around a 3 dimensional body. How else could that 3 dimensional information have been encoded within the shroud? No other 2 dimensional painting pops out like this when you put it through the VP8 analyzer. And so this set off a whole team to go and study the shroud. 2 years later, 30 scientists went to Turin to study the shroud for 5 continuous days using state-of-the-art technology at the time. They took ultraviolet photographs And this group of scientists is known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP. You can see where they come from here. These are experts in a variety of fields. So we have forensics, image analysis, chemistry, X-ray radiography, physics, and they took about 80 crates, 80 containers of equipment, state-of-the-art equipment with them to Turin, Italy, to use in their research on the shroud. And here's the rest of the group. So these are experts in a variety of fields, and they were not all Christians. In fact, one in particular thought it would take him 15 minutes to prove that the shroud was a forgery, a hoax. Here they are moving the shroud over to the research table. And here's another picture of them examining the shroud up close using their equipment. And what did they conclude after all of their study and then after analyzing all of their data? Here's what they concluded. We can conclude for now that the shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist. The bloodstains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin. The image is an ongoing mystery until further chemical studies are made, perhaps by this group of scientists or perhaps by some scientists in the future. The problem remains unsolved. Why did they say it is not the product of an artist? Because no substances manually applied to the cloth, no artistic substances such as paint, ink, dye, pigments, or stain were used to constitute the image. No collagen binder as would be used with paint. No fibers cemented to each other as with paint. No capillary action, meaning no liquids were applied to form the image. No substances found between threads as with the dust rubbing. Bloodstains on cloth test positive for heme, bile, serum albumin, and other human blood components. The blood is male type AB. That is a very rare blood type, but common among Jewish males. So the image on the shroud was created not with paint, not with any added substance. What they found in the fibers was that the fibers were degraded or darkened, and that's how the image was formed, but not with any added substance. Something changed the nature of those fibers or darkened them, but no added substance. In 1988, a small corner of the shroud was cut and radiocarbon dated by 3 laboratories in Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona. The labs determined a date range from between 1260 to 1390. The scientists involved concluded that the shroud is a medieval artifact with 95% certainty. You can see in this picture behind the 3 scientists the dates 1260 to 1390, exclamation point. They are quite sure that the shroud is a medieval artifact because of the radiocarbon dating. To do radiocarbon dating, they had to cut a piece of the shroud. They used one corner, and then they would have cut that sample into 3 pieces and sent it to each of those 3 laboratories. And the results came back that it is a medieval artifact. Now, these results have been highly debated. Some people say that corner of the shroud or any corner of the shroud would have been contaminated because that's what people would have used to hold up the shroud. Throughout the centuries, they would have been touching that corner and contaminating it. That is one theory about how the dates could be wrong. But then we have recently in 2019, this study that came out, it says the raw data were never released by the institutions. In 2017, in response to a legal request, all raw data kept by the British Museum were made accessible. A statistical analysis of the Nature article and the raw data strongly suggests that homogeneity is lacking in the data and that the procedure should be reconsidered. Chain of custody. Where has this shroud been and who has owned it throughout the centuries? Well, as far as we can tell, the story begins in 1349 with a French knight named Geoffroy de Charny. He's in possession of the shroud, and he's holding up a shield there in this little cartoon painting, and that is his family crest. So some believe that since he was a French knight, oh, sorry, I spelled knight wrong, put a K in front of that. Since he was a French knight, he would have gone to Constantinople and possibly retrieved the shroud or took possession of the shroud while he was on that particular mission or battle. In 1355, the shroud was exhibited in the new Collegiate Church of Liray, a village in north central France. So de Charny allowed them to exhibit his, his shroud, and thousands came to see it, and souvenir medals were made. You can see here the souvenir medal on the left is is an actual medal that was made. On the right, I'm trying to clarify so you can see more of the details, and that's a drawing. So we have here the front and back side of the man, and stretched out on what looks like a rectangular piece of linen. What's broken off at the top are two church leaders or priests holding up the shroud so people can see it. You can see the cross and the crown of thorns underneath that shroud and de Charny's family crest. And so this was a medal that you could purchase if you went to the church in Liray, France, showing that you had seen this very special object. In 1460, Margaret de Charny dies, Geoffroy's granddaughter. So the shroud was passed down a couple generations within this one family. And the shroud was then returned to church leaders in Liray. Of course, they wanted it back. That brought a lot of pilgrims to their church. In 1464, the shroud becomes the property of the House of Savoy. They had some negotiations with Margaret. I believe they gave her a castle in return for some special services. It's not stated what those special services were, but some believe that she promised the shroud to them or gave them the shroud. And so the House of Savoy now is in possession of the shroud, and they move it down to Saint-Chapelle in Chambéry, France, about a 4.5-hour drive south of Liray. And you can see on this map where Turin is located. It's going to ultimately end up in Turin. In 1532, a fire broke out in Saint-Chapelle. It melted part of the silver in the container protecting the shroud, and this silver fell onto part of the shroud, burning through it. And so that's where those scorch marks come from. And there have been repair patches placed in those areas and then removed. And so there's a long history. There's actually a couple fires that the shroud has survived, but this one left very prominent scorch marks on it. Since 1578, the shroud has been kept at the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, because the House of Savoy made Turin their new capital. And so in this picture here, you can see it was on exhibit in Turin in 1978. From August 27th to October 8th, about 3 million people went to see the shroud at that time in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. Upon the death of King Umberto II on March 18th, 1983, he is from the House of Savoy. He bequeathed the shroud to the Pope and his successors with the condition that the cloth stays in Turin. And so the most recent owner of the shroud was Pope Francis. Since he has passed away, his successor will be the new owner of the shroud. So that's what we know about the chain of custody of the shroud, what we can say with certainty. But we have some other clues that indicate it was older than the 1300s. First, we have what's known as the Hungarian Prey manuscript, which dates to 1192 to 1195. And in this manuscript, we have this image that's on the screen. At the top, we have the body being anointed. Looks like two men, and there's a bystander there in the back. At the bottom, we have three women, and one of the women looks like she's holding up a face. And then we have material below them. So let's zoom in on that material. The material, the pattern on the shroud is called a herringbone weave. It's where the vertical strips are in front of the horizontal strips. And so in that middle image there, that's part of the shroud. You can see some blood on that part of the shroud. And so people think in this Hungarian Prey manuscript, we can see that same pattern on the material that's below the women, a herringbone weave. Second, we see red crosses, which some say that indicates the blood on the shroud. And third, we have a very unique pattern of holes, which are in an L shape, four holes that make the letter L. And these are burn marks on the original shroud. But within this image in the Hungarian manuscript, we can see that same pattern of holes. So for many people, this is conclusive that the shroud was known as early as the late 1100s, whereas the radiocarbon dating says it dates from 1260 to 1390. So we're already at least 60 years earlier than radiocarbon dating. Again, what that one woman is holding up an actual face is very strange and seems to indicate something about that cloth that they're next to. Second, we have this image called Christ Pantocrator. It's one of the oldest icons of Christ, dates to the 500s AD. And many people believe the image of Christ, the common image with long hair and a long beard and a long nose, it must have had a precedent somewhere. How did that become the most common depiction of Christ? And so people looking at the shroud say, well, we can see points of correspondence or correlation between the shroud image, the face on the shroud, and the face in famous pieces of artwork of Christ. So we have, again, long hair, a long nose. Oh, yeah, and the hair is longer on one side than the other. We have a long beard, prominent eyes, and there's even a mark on the neck on that icon. And we have something on the neck of the man on the shroud. So many people believe that the image of the shroud is the prototype of Christ's image that was used in subsequent pieces of art. Likewise, we have the Byzantine gold coin, which dates to the late 600s. This also shows Christ with long hair and a long beard. And there's a cross behind his head. So we know that is a depiction of Christ on the coin. And again, people say, well, how did everyone start painting him the same way? Well, if we have a common image that was known, then that could have been used as the prototype, as the thing they copied. Next, we have what's called the Sudarium of Oviedo in Oviedo, Spain. This is a headcloth or sweat cloth that some believed wrapped around the head of Jesus. The bloodstains and blood type match the Shroud of Turin. The Sudarium can be dated to at least 570 AD. So we have this story in John chapter 20. It says, then Simon Peter came along behind him, that's behind the disciple whom Jesus loved, and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. So the way that this would have been used would have been that the people who took Jesus' body down from the cross would have first gone up to his head area and wrapped his head, because the blood coming out of the body is precious. And so you want to preserve that blood. So they would have wrapped his head first, then taken his body down from the cross, then laid out the linen. And at that point, they could have removed the headcloth and then wrapped the body in linen in the shroud. And so then now we have two pieces of fabric that could have been used on Jesus's dead body. Again, the blood type is blood AB on the sudarium, and the stains match when we put it on top of the shroud. They match where the stains should be. Finally, we have this wide angle X-ray scattering or wax machine, which has been recently used to date fabric on the shroud. And the researchers say we obtained one-dimensional integrated wax data profiles for the TS, that's Turin shroud sample, which were fully compatible with the analogous measurements obtained on a linen sample, whose dating, according to historical records, is 55 to 74 AD, siege of Masada in Israel. The degree of natural aging of the cellulose that constitutes the linen of the investigated sample, obtained by X-ray analysis, showed that the TS fabric is much older than the 7 centuries proposed by the 1988 radiocarbon dating. The experimental results are compatible with the hypothesis that the TS is a 2,000-year-old relic as supposed by Christian tradition, under the condition that it was kept at suitable levels of average secular temperature, 20 to 22.5 degrees Celsius, and correlated relative humidity, 75 to 55%, for 13 centuries of unknown history, in addition to the 7 centuries of known history in Europe. So, according to this recent study, the shroud is much older than 700 years old or 800 years old. It goes back 2,000 years. And they did this by comparing a piece of linen that they know dates to 55 to 74 AD. And then they took the same fabric, the fabric from the shroud, and compared that through their X-ray analysis, X-ray scattering machine, and found that they are analogous to each other, meaning that the shroud could go back 2,000 years as well. Now let's consider the biblical evidence. How does the Shroud of Turin match with what we know from the Gospels? Number one, Jesus' body was wrapped in a linen cloth. All 4 Gospels say this. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth. Matthew 27:59. Joseph bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in linen. Mark 15:46. Joseph took it down, wrapped it in linen cloth. Luke 23:53. Taking Jesus' body, the 2 of them, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, wrapped it with the spices in strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. John 19:40. Number 2, the linen cloth was found in the empty tomb. John 20, verses 4 through 8. Both of them are running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. Number 3, scourge marks. We have scourge marks on the man on the shroud, and we know that the Romans flogged Jesus or scourged Jesus. They used what's known as a flagrum, and this would have been a whip with probably metal balls at the end. And as you zoom in on these scourge marks on the man on the shroud, you can see in the circle here indentations, darker points at the tips at both ends, indicating possibly ball-like objects were placed on this whip. And so we have, from one counting, 372 wounds on the man on the shroud. And this image here heightens the contrast so that you can see those wounds more clearly, but they are all over his body. And here's the backside. Again, the wounds all the way from the top of the shoulders, all the way down to the bottom of the legs. This man on the shroud was scourged or flogged. Number 4, we have a wound in the hand or wrist area. You can see a lot of blood coming from that wrist area. And this was unique. In the Middle Ages, people, when they depicted Jesus, they would show the nail mark going right through the palm of the hand. But in the man on the shroud, it's closer to the bottom of the hand or the wrist. And that blood that you see on the arms is blood that would have flowed down from the wound in the wrist down the arms. And studies have been done on the flow of blood from people in a crucified position, and the flow matches exactly where the blood should be flowing if somebody was crucified, how it would flow down the arms. Number 5, we have wounds in the feet area. And again, if Jesus was crucified, his hands and his feet would have been pierced. Over on the right side is an actual object that we discovered in Israel, and it dates to 2,000 years old. And we have a nail going through the heel area. This is very hard to find because Romans reused these nails. They would have taken them out of the crucified victims. But in this one, we have the nail still in place. So we know that they crucified people by piercing their hands, piercing their feet 2,000 years ago. We actually have an archaeological artifact proving that. And then on the man on the shroud, you can see all of that blood coming from the feet area. So wounds in the hand and wounds in the feet. We also have number 6, blood coming from the head. And the Bible says that a crown of thorns was placed on Jesus' head. We often show that crown as a wreath, but it could have been more like a whole cap of thorns placed over his head. And so there is a lot of blood coming from the front of his head and from the back of his head. Number 7, we have swelling on his face. And the Gospels talk about Jesus being hit in the face while he was being punished and persecuted before he was crucified. So we have a swelling on his face. Number 8, we have a puncture in his side. You can see all of that blood on the image there. That's the front. On the left side is the front image. And on the back, we can see that blood was just flowing down his waist area, coming from the wound. So in John 19, one of the soldiers went up to Jesus's dead body and he pierced his side to see if he was really dead. And it says blood and water flowed out of that side. And so this matches that detail in the Gospels as well. Number 9, the legs are not broken. Jesus died fairly quickly, and they did not have to break his legs to speed up the death process. And so the legs on the man on the shroud are not broken. And number 10, there's no decomposition. The body has not begun to decompose. And so that indicates it was not in the shroud for very long. And we know Jesus was killed on Friday and raised on Sunday. So his body did not have time to decompose. So those are 10 correlations between the shroud and the Gospels, the details about Jesus' suffering and death in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now let's end with some basic facts about the shroud. It's the only image of its kind known to exist. It's the only one. We don't have another piece of linen with an image on it like we have on the shroud. It's a full-length front and back image of a scourged and crucified nude human male on one piece of linen. It is a negative image. It encodes 3D information. It contains real blood. The blood was placed on the cloth before the image because there is no image under the blood. This was kind of hard to understand, but it makes sense. If the blood came in contact with the shroud, then the blood would have transferred onto the shroud. And so we have that, but then the image is not underneath the blood. There's no image under the blood. The blood is there first, the image is on top. So how were these two things created? It almost seems like we have two separate processes at play here: how the image was made, how the blood was transferred onto the linen cloth. John Dominic Crossan is a critical New Testament scholar, does not believe Jesus rose from the dead, and he concludes that the shroud is a medieval relic forgery. And then he writes, I wonder whether it was done from a crucified dead body or from a crucified living body. That is the rather horrible question once you accept it as a forgery. All right, that's a very important statement. He believes it's a forgery. It's a relic. Somebody in the Middle Ages made it. But do you understand what he's saying? How they made it would have been either from a crucified dead body or from a crucified living body. It's real human blood. There was a real human in this shroud. We don't know how the image was made. All kinds of speculation and theories have been proposed. For those who believe this is actually Jesus's burial cloth, one theory is the resurrection, light coming from his body when he was raised, could have imprinted or transferred this image onto the cloth. But nobody can scientifically say how this image was made. It cannot be reproduced. People have tried, and they have been unsuccessful. It corresponds with the suffering and death of Jesus of Nazareth as recorded in the Gospels. Now, let me end with this. The research is ongoing. There are hundreds of articles published on the Shroud of Turin. You can go to shroud.com and find many of them posted there. But in this book by Gilbert Levoy, he's a medical doctor, he says this, and I'll end with this and then with one more image of the shroud. He says, the blood marks are absolutely consistent with those of a crucified dead man who has been taken down from his vertical position of crucifixion and placed supine, that is horizontal with his head facing up, on one end of this long cloth, and then covered by the other end. And within that cloth, we see the blood marks that show that the man was buried in this supine position. Yet the image of the man is not in the supine position. His image is in the upright position with his hair falling to his shoulders and his feet not touching the ground. This book was published in 2023, so people are still seeing new details in the shroud. What Dr. Levoy is saying is he actually had models lay down horizontally on plexiglass. He looked underneath. He saw that their buttocks was flattened when they're laying horizontally. But in the man on the shroud, that's not the case. The buttocks is not flat. Also, he noticed that on his models, the hair fell back. It didn't fall straight down. Because of gravity, if they're horizontal, the hair is going to fall back. But in the man on the shroud, the hair is falling straight down. And there are some other details with shadows and things of that nature, which he noticed, which only match with someone in the vertical position. And yet his feet aren't touching the ground. At least one of them is not touching the ground. It seems to be uplifted. And so this blew Dr. Levoy away when he realized this. How can you get the hair to fall straight down like it is? And so one theory, again, is this showing us, this one piece of cloth showing us the death, the suffering, all of the wounds Jesus endured out of his love for us, and the moment of his resurrection. Could it be showing both things? Whatever conclusion you come to, I hope that you conclude the shroud is an amazing artifact. It is the most studied archaeological artifact in the history of the world. So I hope you are at least amazed at the image of the man in the shroud.